Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I feel as if I was in my department. Let me begin by saying, by quoting Dylan Thomas, it was my 52nd year to heaven, because today is my birthday. So, yes.
Is it your birthday?
Yeah, today. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So I'm not going to read the introduction again that I read when presenting Eduardo's paper. I'm not going to explain to you the content of the project, but let me clarify that my paper is included within the first target of within the first target of the project to clarify the image of the Spanish Empire and the Spaniards that More contributed to build in Tudor England, because I'm dealing with I'm going to address the presence of Spanish names, whatever that might be, or that might mean, in Thomas More's published works and in his personal correspondence. So all these names making reference to Spaniards that appear in the complete works of Thomas More and in his correspondence. The first thing I'm doing is locating them, identifying them if necessary, and then making explicit the role of relevance that they had for More, that these names have for More. The corpus of analysis may be arranged in two groups: More's complete works, published by the University of Yale in 15 volumes between 1963 and 1996. This is all Moreana, published by Yale University Press. And then Thomas More's correspondence contained in Elizabeth Rogers' 1947 compilation published by Princeton University Press. And the massive Opus Epistolarum Erasmi Rotterdami, edited by Allen and Allen at Oxford University Press, containing More's Latin Epistolae to Erasmus. Oh my God, it's 12 volumes, but the good news is that they are all available in the Internet Archive, so you may have easy access to them. Of the 15 volumes of More's works published by Yale University Press, I have already revised up to number 9. Volumes 13 and 14 have been partially analyzed. As for the Epistolae Moreana, I still have to complete the analysis of the letters in Allen and Allen compilation of Erasmus letters, but I have already dealt with Elizabeth Rogers' monograph work. With the results achieved so far, you may go on. All right. With the results achieved so far, I have organized the references into 5 groups. Reference to the royal family, references to scholars, references to clergy, members of the church. Did I say 5 groups? It's 4 groups. The 5th one is coming, maybe. And the 4th is fiction characters. Now, the first group, dealing with the royal family, is particularly interesting, and it includes the names of Catherine of Aragon, Isabella of Spain, Ferdinand of Spain, and Charles V. From this list of names, it can be easily inferred that due to his early involvement in political matters and much to his friend Erasmus' displeasure, More was aware of the hegemonic role played by imperial Spain in the European scenario, one in which Tudor England had much to gain, especially after the royal marriage that Ferdinand and Isabelle had arranged with Henry VII, between a Spanish princess and the heir to the throne of England. As a matter of fact, Catherine of Aragon is the most often mentioned Spanish name in More's written production, something which is, after all, quite logic. In a letter to his friend John Holt, Thomas More reported the entry of the Spanish Princess Catalina into London. Prince Arthur's bride surely impressed More, but some of the members, at least of a royal retinue, were not described in such terms of approval. You have here the translation, the Latin text of More in his letter to Holt. Obviously, illustrissima regis Hispanorum filia Caterina et eadem splendissimi nostri principis uxor. I mean, Catherine of Aragon was impressive for More, and at the end of this excerpt, Domina ipsa mi crede omnibus abunde placuit. Everybody loves Catherine of Aragon. But he also adds, talking about the members of her retinue, he says, curvi erant laceri nudipedes pigmei Aethiopes sia fuises ex inferis evasive putavises. In other words, they were hunchback, barefoot, Ethiopian pygmies. If you were there, you would think that they were refugees from hell. Now, in the book Black Leaves in the English Archives, Imtiaz Habib claims that the barefooted pygmy in Catherine's retinue are black female slaves. So this is an image from a TV series that was on air for the first time last Monday, and it bears the title of The Spanish Princess. So you may see Catherine, and there is a black lady of company at her left. She doesn't look like a hunchback to me, neither does that servant up there, right? So it seems that the creators of this movie, of this series, are aware of the fact that there were black people in Catherine's retinue. As for Ferdinand and Isabelle, their presence is mostly due to the fact that they were the parents of Catherine. Emperor Charles, whose relations with More I have described in detail elsewhere, stands for himself. He was indeed Catherine's nephew, but also the most powerful ruler in Western Europe, thus appearing as early as 1516 in More's Utopia. Needless to say that Charles was not born in Spain, but More saw him as the international face of the Kingdom of Castile of Spain. The very beginning of Utopia reads, Henry VIII, the unconquered King of England, having some differences of no small consequence with Charles, the most serene Prince of Castile, sent me into Flanders. The second group of Spanish names in Thomas More written output is so far constituted by just three names, and I'm going to pass by. You have Seneca, the Roman from Hispania, born in Cordoba. You also have a reference to Quintilian, who was also probably in the Roman Hispania, and also there is reference to Juan Luis Vives. But there are so many references to the Spanish humanist, as I have already shown elsewhere, that I'm not going to deal with this issue either. All right, both in his works and in his correspondence with Erasmus. We tend to assume that there was personal correspondence in between Juan Luis Vives and Thomas More, but none has been preserved. So, but you have Erasmus talking about Juan Luis Vives in his letters to More, and More talking about Juan Luis Vives in his letter to Erasmus. The third group is constituted by those references that I have been able to locate so far to members of the Church. Pablo de Santa Maria is referred to in several works, couple of works by Thomas More as Burgensis, because he was known as Paulus Episcopus Burgensis. Pablo de Santa Maria was a Spanish Jew who converted to Christianity and became Archbishop of Cartagena and Burgos. He was also Lord Chancellor of Castile under Henry III. He gained a reputation as exegete thanks to his Additiones ad Postillam Magistri Nicolae Lyra, which is a compilation of approximately 1,100 suggestions and additions to Nicholas of Lyra Postilla. It seems that while Thomas More was at the Tower of London, already a prisoner at the Tower of London, he had this Pablo de Santa Maria in mind because he mentions him twice in the two works that he wrote while at the Tower. The first of them is the treatise on the Passion, and the second one in Latin is the Tristitia Christi. In the first one, he simply says that he is not in agreement with Pablo de Santa Maria's dating of the Passover at the time when Christ was crucified. But the second one makes such a very explicit praise of the Spaniards when he says Paul of St. Mary, Archbishop of Burgos, a learned, holy man, and an outstanding investigator of sacred subjects. Next one, please. Friar Alphonse. Father Alphonse is driving me crazy, for his identification is not that clear as in the previous case. In the Apology, the work that Thomas More wrote in order to defend himself of all the attacks that he was going through, published in 1533, he says, "And Father Alphonse, the Spanish friar, told me that the devils be no such deformed, evil-favored creatures as men imagine them." I'm not going to read the whole quotation. Now, two names contained in the identification of this Spanish friar mentioned by More, as if his audience would immediately know who he was talking about. Yes, you know, Alphonse the friar, you know who am I talking about, but we don't. Now, so we have on the one hand, Alfonso de Castro, known as the Hammer of Heretics, who was confessor and a learned writer, a member of the Franciscan order. In that sense, he fits within this Friar Alphonse by Thomas More, in the reference by Thomas More. But it seems to be the case that he did not come to England when Thomas More was still alive, but he began to travel all over Europe from 1592 onwards. Nevertheless, in 1553, he came to England with Philip II, and it is precisely at that time when this picture of him was taken of Father Alfonso, is that one over there, and here is the Anglican martyr John Bradford, and Alfonso de Castro trying to convince him back into the right Catholic doctrine. But it doesn't seem so necessarily. He cannot be the man that More was or had in mind. There is another Alfonso, also a Franciscan, whose name is Alfonso de Villasanta, right? And it seems to be the case that Thomas Stapleton, who was one of the first biographers, not the first, but one of the first biographers of the English humanist, one that was one of the exiles in the Netherlands, and he had personal contacts with some people who had personally met Thomas More, and particularly one of them, John Harris, who was Thomas More's secretary. John Harris told Stapleton, and thus he writes in his biography of More, published in 1588, I'm going to read the English translation. "I myself once heard him arguing," says John Harris, "with Father Alphonsus, the friars minor," meaning Franciscan, "who had been confessor to Queen Catherine, the first wife of Henry VIII. He was defending the opinion of Scotus, Tum Scotus, on attrition and contrition as safer and more probable than the opinion of Ockham, William of Ockham." So if Father Alphonsus had been confessor to the Queen for some time, More's audience in his apology would be acquainted with him. This seems to be the case, for as early as 1518, Alfonso de Villasanta had supervised the publication in Paris of a work that dealt with both William of Ockham and Dum Scotus, precisely the two names that are reproduced by John Harris. Further than that, Alfonso de Villasanta managed to publish two works in London in 1523, and you have a picture of these two works here. The first one is the Libero Arbitrio adversus Melanchthonum, and the second one is Problema Indulgentiarum. In both works, he explicitly dedicates them to Regina Clarissima, Queen Catherine, whom he praises, this is an interesting detail, as fidei defensatrix, exactly as her husband was a defensor fidei, but maybe not that much by the time that these works were published. ¿Cómo voy, mamá? 5 minutes, thank you. So let us rest this question in peace. And I think that Alfonso Villasanta was the Father Alphonsus to which Thomas More was making reference in the apology. There's a third name of another member of the church that is mentioned by Thomas More in his work. Let me check. 15. Yes, the De Tristitia Christi, another. The last work that Thomas More wrote while he was at the tower. This work was left unfinished, and the character that is named is not named at all, but reference is made to one of his most best known works. It is the so-called Tractatus Parva Logicalia, the Little Logic, which is a work attributed to an author by the name of Petrus Hispanus, Peter of Spain. Who this Peter of Spain was is a matter of discussion even nowadays. For some people, he eventually became Pope John the 20th. For some others, he was a Portuguese. Anyway, for More, he was a clear and one of the last outstanding figure of scholastic philosophy, and his way of reasoning was for More as complex and intricate as the reasonings of Martin Luther, and that's the reason why he introduces him in his last work. So, next one, please. Fiction characters that apparently bear Spanish names might be these two characters in the first edition of Responsio ad Lutherum, published in 1523. There is a kind of prefatory letter, a first version of which, a prefatory letter to the Responsio ad Lutherum, the first version of which is written by a person by the name of Ferdinandus Varabellus, that Thomas More clearly uses as a pseudonym for himself. And the letter is addressed to Franciscus Lucellus. I have not been able to trace any kind of meaning behind this name. And as for Ferdinandus Varabellus, Varabellus was the name of a fool, of a very famous fool at the court of some pope whose name I don't remember. So again, Thomas More is playing with words. Raphael Hythrodeus is the one who speaks nonsense, and Ferdinandus Varabellus is the one who is playing the fool, writing this text against Luther. I'm not, obviously, or unfortunately, the first one to point out these two names as Spanish-like characters, because in the Yale edition of the complete works of Thomas More, the volume devoted to Responsio ad Lutherum, The editor says Spain was the land to which the emperor had recently gone, and also the land from which the new Pope Adrian had come. Spain was fast becoming the traditional ally of England. So that gives you an idea of why Thomas More might be making reference to Ferdinand Barbarossa in 1523. This essay would have been much, much longer if More's most famous character, Raphael Hithlodey, had been born a bit more eastwards, just a bit more eastwards, for he would be Spanish and not Portuguese. All right, let me conclude my paper with an anecdote, making explicit the idea that Thomas More had of Spain. William Roper, Thomas More's son-in-law, the husband of Margaret, and the author of the first biography, states that Cardinal Wolsey had suggested to Henry VIII that Sir Thomas More would be a fitting ambassador in Spain. He was trying to send More away from court as a punishment for confronting him at Parliament in the April 1523 sessions. But for the revenge, Roper says, but for the revenge of his displeasure, counseled the king to send him ambassador into Spain, commending to his highness his wisdom, learning, and neatness for that voyage. And the difficulty of the cause considered, none was there, he said, so well able to serve his grace therein. Nobody's going to serve you more, my highness, as Thomas More. Whether this was for revenge or convenience, Thomas More was in open disagreement with the way Wolsey was dealing with the so famous King's Matter. The idea was far from pleasing to Thomas More. When informed, he was literally scared to death. When the king had broken to Sir Thomas More and that he had declared unto his grace how unfit a journey it was for him, the nature of the country, Spain, the disposition of his complexion so disagreeing together that he should never be likely to do his grace acceptable service there, knowing right well that if his grace sent him thither, he should send him to his grave. The king, Roper concluded, thought of someone else for such position. Cuthbert Tunstall and Sir Richard Wingfield were set instead. The latter died on the way to Toledo on 22nd July 1525. It was not wise to cross the Spanish Meseta in the summer heat. Had More come to Spain, his relation with Charles would have been entirely different, much to my pleasure, had he managed to survive. Thank you very much.